This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone, Shalom Aleichem. We continue in the Daf Hashavua Iyun Sugya. Today we have somewhat of an out-of-the-box topic. If we have time, we're going to see a second subject as well. Firstly, we mentioned yesterday in the Chazara, the Gemara on the bottom of Mem Chesam Beis tells us a story that Rav Chanina Bar Papi and Rav Ami and Rav Yitzchak Nafka were sitting on the porch of Rav Yitzchak Nafka. So we had a kasha, why do we need to know that they were sitting on the porch? Who cares where they were sitting? So we had a big chiddush yesterday. The Gemara is teaching you what are porches for. You know, you might think porches are for barbecuing or for hammock. No, porches are for learning. So that's stam a good chiddush from Yevamos Mem Chesam Beis. But then the Gemara brought an interesting sugya. We learned in a brayso, Rab Chananya, the son of Rab Gamliel, says, why are Geirim Bizman Hazeh afflicted? So Gemara says because they were not Mekayim the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. To which Rabbi Yossi says, what do you mean they were Mekayim the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? Gershin Esgayer Kakatan Shenoy Ladami. That they may not have fulfilled the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, but once they convert, they're like a newborn creation. And the same way they could marry their sister or they can marry a relative because they're not related, they're also not responsible for previous activity. So the Gemara brings another pshat, Lefi she'einam b'kiyam b'dikdukei mitzvahs ki Yisrael, because they're not knowledgeable about the particulars of various mitzvahs. So, my question is, what does Rab Chananya, the son of Gamliel, hold? L'chayra, he agrees there's a concept of Gershin Esgayer Kakatan Shenoy Ladami. So why would he say that Goyim are responsible for not keeping the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? Well, maybe they would have been punished when they were Goyim, but now they're Jews and now they're not responsible anymore because that was a previous existence. In other words, does Rabbi Chananya disagree with the concept of Gershin Esgayer Kakatan Shenoy Ladami? L'chayra, that's a concept that everybody holds. Like everyone agrees when a brother and sister convert, midaraisa they can marry each other. So why would he say that they're responsible for their previous activities? So this is a question I had many years ago, and I want to suggest the following approach, and you'll tell me what you think. It's based on something I once saw in the Kli Chemda. I saw it many years ago. Let's see if I could bring it up over here. No, it didn't send? Oh, let's see if I could bring it up here. Okay, it just went. Here it is. Okay. Could you see? So this comes from the Sefer Kli Chemda of Rav Meir Dan Platsky, who was a Talmud of the Avnei Nezer. And he's referring to a certain comment of the Shev Shmaitza. The Shev Shmaitza in his Akdama learns that when the Jewish people stood on Har Sinai, they had a din of Gerim, and Gershin Esgayer Kakatan Shenoy Ladami, and therefore they were allowed to stay married to their relatives. Because we know that many Jews were married to relatives before the Torah was given. And after the Torah was given, only Moshe Rabbeinu had to separate from his spouse, but not the other Jews. On the other hand, Chazal do say that after Matan Torah, Klal Yisrael were boichel mishpachosav. They were crying over their families, which seems to mean that they did have to separate from their spouses. And the Shev Shmaitza discusses, well, why did they have to separate from their spouse? Gershin Esgayer Kakatan Shenoy Ladami. So they should be allowed. In other words, let's say Amram. Did Amram have to separate from Yocheved? He was married to his aunt. Or do we say, look, Gershin Esgayer Kakatan Shenoy Ladami? So Chazal seem to indicate that Klal Yisrael in fact did have to separate because they were boichel mishpachosav. So the bottom line is the Shev Shmaitza learns that the Divrei Hagoyin Baal Shev Shmaitza hold the Asal Yadan. Once we came to a name of Behumilsa, let's say something about it. V'noimar, the Mad Pasha Leila Hagoyin Zal, the Inami di Yisrael, the Matan Torah Lem Din Ger Shenasar Gonshadami, like Kaimu L'Reish Lakish Mitzvahs Pru Uravu, B'Vneim Shalem Koidem Matan Torah, Hayutzrichem L'Kai Mechadash Mitzvahs Pru Uravu. You ready for this Chiddush? We're gonna have to learn another Gemara in Yevamos, but there's a Shaila Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Let's say a guy and his wife, Jim and Jane, were married and they had 22 children, and then they decide to convert. So, do they have to have more children, right? Or do we say they're already Mekayim in the mitzvah of Puravu? So Rabbi Yochanan says they had children, so they were Yotze the mitzvah. Reish Lakish says no, they Gershon is Gayer, Kakatan Shenoy Ladami. They were not Mekayim the mitzvah. Now, what we would like to do is, why would Rabbi Yochanan say that they were Mekayim the mitzvah, but those children are not attributed to them? The Shita of Rabbi Yochanan may help us understand the Shita of Rabbi Hanania, the son of Ram Gamliel. Because Rabbi Yochanan says if Goyim have children, they don't have to have more children when they convert, because we don't apply the rule of Gershon es Gayer, Kekatan Shnola Dami. So the Shev Shmaitza says that when the Jews were Makabel the Torah, they were required to have more children, because whatever children they had before were children they had as Goyim, and now they're Jews, so they have to have more children. Says the Kli Chemda Alanias Daiti Nira Pashut, it would seem to be very simple, the Afilu Reish Lakish Moida, that Klal Yisrael were Mekayim the mitzvah of Puravu with the children they had before Matan Torah, even though Reish Lakish holds that Goyim, when they convert, they have to have more children. Says the Kli Chemda, let's learn a Sugya in Yevamos Daf Samach Beis. V'naktim levar divrei Gemara Yevamos. Let us proceed by introducing the Gemara Yevamos. The Isa Hasam we find over there. Itmar hayuloi banim b'yoisai akum. If someone had children when they were goyim, v'nis gayer. Rabbi Yochanan Amar kiyem puravu. Rabbi Yochanan says you're mekayim puravu. Reish Lakish Amar loy kiyem puravu. Reish Lakish says you're not mekayim puravu. Why? Gershon es gayer kekatan shenel adami. That's one machlekes. And then says the Gemara va'azli l'tamayo. They go according to their reason. The Idmar, because we learned, hayuloi banim b'yoisei akum. Let's say you had kids when you were a guy, v'nis gayer. Rabbi Yochanan Amar ein loy b'char l'nachala. In other words, if you had children when you were a guy and then you have another child, that child is not a b'char. The havala, you already had children. Reish Lakish Amar yesh loy b'char. Gershon es gayer shenol adami. You didn't have children before. And says the Gemara, why do I need both statements of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? In other words, they both seem to be saying the same thing. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't subscribe to Gershon es gayer kekatan shenol adami, and Reish Lakish does. Utzricha, I need both of them. Because if it would just say that Rabbi Yochanan holds that you're Mekayim the mitzvah of Puravu, B'haika Amar Rabbi Yochanan, then Rabbi Yochanan says you get the mitzvah, Mishum demeikara nami b'nei Puravu nenu. Because in the beginning, even as a guy, Goyim are also included in the mitzvah of Puravu. So that's why Rabbi Yochanan holds that whatever children you had as Goyim count for the mitzvah of Puravu, because as a guy, Goyim also have the mitzvah of Puravu, which by the way we're going to have to ask, because Goyim do not have the mitzvah of Puravu. You know that? There's no mitzvah of Puravu on Goyim. We'll have to address that because Hashem did tell Adam Arishan, Va'atem Puravu, and Adam Arishan was not Jewish. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that any mitzvah that was told to Bnei Noach and then repeated to Klal Yisrael is only to Klal Yisrael and not to the Bnei Noach. So the Gemara v'iyid mar bahan, if it would just say the second machlekes, bahaka amar Reish Lakish, then Reish Lakish says there's no din of bechor when it comes to goyim, but when it comes to children, maybe Reish Lakish would agree to Rabbi Yochanan. That's why I need both machlekes in. Now, what does it mean goyim are bnei? Now we see two important things. One of them is most critical. The Gemara says that because goyim have the mitzvah of puravu, so when they convert, perhaps we don't say Gershon es gayer kekatan shenol adami. What do we see from here? Because Gershon es gayer kekatan shenol adami is not an across-the-board idea. It's if regarding this detail you're a new creation, so for that detail you're a new creation. But if regarding, my volume is off. You can't hear me? You hear it? Yeah? Oh, I don't hear you. Somebody want to say something?
I want to say that don't always have the obligation to a mitzvah to populate the world. You learn it from a different the Torah.
Right. So yeah, the Mishnah says in Gittin that all of mankind has a mitzvah of loisoihu bara l'shavas yitzara, but that's not the mitzvah of puravu. So in other words, all of man has the mitzvah to populate, and that, by the way, loisoihu bara applies to women also, but women don't have a mitzvah puravu. Only men have a mitzvah puravu. The Meshech Chochmah says because puravu hurts. It's a very painful mitzvah. So God doesn't give a mitzvah that hurts. So man has a mitzvah puravu. A woman doesn't have a mitzvah puravu. So technically, the man has to get married. Chayiv ish linaseh isha. The man has to marry the woman. The woman doesn't have the mitzvah to get married. She has a mitzvah of l'sheves. She doesn't have a mitzvah puravu. Okay, so the question is, what does the Gemara mean that? Okay, so the point I'm trying to bring out is that Gerushin Asgar Gatan Shnal Dami is not across the board. Oh, you became Jewish, so now everything in your previous existence doesn't count. No, only regarding the things that you're now a new person, are you a new person. So regarding any mitzvah that you now have, that you didn't have before, you're a new being. But regarding those mitzvahs that you had before, we don't say Gerushin Asgar Gatan Shnal Dami. That's what Rabbi Yochanan holds, that the children you had as Goyim count for when you're Jewish, because Goyim have the mitzvah puravu. So what does it mean Goyim have the mitzvah puravu? Rashi says, God said, be fruitful and multiply. Says Gemara, we have to understand, Kavanas Rashi bezeh, ha-pruravu havanemra, v'loi nishnis. What do you mean? Pruravu was said to Bnei Noach. Okay, I didn't say the rule correctly. It was said to Bnei Noach. It was not repeated to Klal Yisrael. So the rule in Sanhedrin is any mitzvah given to Bnei Noach and not repeated to the Jewish people only applies to the Jewish people, does not apply to the Bnei Noach. But Harei Nemra, it was said to Bnei Noach. V'loi nishnas uli Yisrael Nemra v'loi Bnei Noach. Therefore, it's only said to Jews. Who cares? The truth is, before the Torah was given, Goyim were mitzvah puravu. But once the Torah is given, only Jews have puravu. Goyim don't. Uvetoises the Master Bechar Amar Kayim puravu kasu zeloshan afagav del Iyun kama devar amin gerushin zeh katan shnal adame. Even though regarding many things we do say, in other words, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree to the rule. Rabbi Yochanan does not dispute the rule of Gerushin Asgar Katan Shal Dami. Mikamaka mistabra le Rabbi Yochanan hachatz mistaber, according to Rabbi Yochanan, since as a guy they were mekayim, desiroi meyuchas achrav ba'oisa shah mifti nami kishin asgayer. Tosfos says, since as a guy they were mekayim, even though now those children are not meyuchas after them, you're pater from the mitzvah of puravu. So the Kli Chemda says, what's he talking about? How could you say they're makayim puravu? They're not commanded as a ben noach. So how could they be exempt from the mitzvah of puravu if they never had that mitzvah as a guy? So the Kli Chemda says, you have to say, since they were b'nei puravu, now when were they b'nei puravu? 3,400 years ago, before the Torah was given. Dahainu koydem matan Torah. Haya mitzvah aleim. True, afterwards the mitzvah was taken away and given to a Jew. That's only the chiyuv was taken away. But a guy who has children is makayim the mitzvah of puravu the same way a woman is makayim a lulav and esrog, even though she's not mechuyev to. So Kli Chemda says a very interesting chiddush, that even though we say that any mitzvah said to Goyim, not repeated to the Jewish people, applies only to the Jewish people, not to Goyim. That is, the Chiyuv applies to the Jewish people and not to Goyim. but the mitzvah applies to goyim as well. And if they're mekayim it, they're mekayim a mitzvah. So, aval mikol makom nishru ba'oisa mitzvah b'taras rishus, they're allowed to do that mitzvah as discretionary. And if they're mekayim that mitzvah, it's considered like they're performing a mitzvah, like women. According to the opinions of mitzvah saseh shazman grama, women are mekayim as rishus. So kiyoytzu by kasavnu le'el. Like, by the way, the Chemda says the same chiddush by yibum to relatives. Right? We know the Ramban in Chumash says there's a concept that you could do yibum not to eishasach, to chveis. A niece is yibum. What is that? It's not a chiyuv, it's a mitzvah which is rishus. Therefore, says the Chemda, even today, even though they're not chayiv in the mitzvah puruvu, they're mekayim the mitzvah. This is what Tosfos means, that even though regarding many things, even Rabbi Yochanan would agree, Gershon Eskar Kekatan Shenol Adami, but regarding Puravu, it's mistaber that Rabbi Yochanan would not hold of Gershon Eskar Kekatan Shenol Adami. In other words, we had a kasha. What's pshat in Rabbi Yochanan that you're mekayim the mitzvah of Puravu, but why don't we say Gershon Eskar Kekatan Shenol Adami, and therefore the children you had as goyim, and that should not allow you to continue to fulfill the mitzvah as a Jew. So what Rabbi Yochanan seems to hold is that since as a goy you didn't have the chiyuv of puravu, but you had the mitzvah of puravu, therefore in the realm of puravu we do not apply gershon esgayer kekatan shenoyel dami, because you didn't make a major change in the realm of puravu. That was something you're always chayiv in. Kivan de koidem giyaris hayam akay mitzvazuvim kein lo yamrinam bezeh gershon esgayer kekatan shenoyel dami. By the way, v'hasvara bezeh al pi ma shekasav be Chuvas Chavos Yair. Now this is the nugget that I want to pull out from here. The svara is based on what's found in the Chuvas Chavos Yair. Levarer the Iyun zeh, this Iyun, the Gershon Eskar Katan Shenaled Talia ba'oisan inyanim shenishtanu mima shahoy b'giyusan, is only regarding those things that things changed from when you're a guy. The ba'oisan inyanim shaloi nishtanu, regarding those things that didn't change. Loi Amar Gershon Esgayer Kekatan Shenodami. We don't say Gershon Esgayer. So this is what Tosfos means. Regarding Puravu, Rabbi Yochanan holds it's not considered a shtani, because even before they were nichlal in the mitzvah Puravu, not as a chiyuv but as a mitzvah. And therefore you're mekayim Puravu. And what does Reish Lakish hold? Reish Lakish would say that even though goyim have the mitzvah, but they don't have the chiyuv, so there was a major change in the realm of Puravu, and therefore we say Gershon Eskar Kekatan Shenodam Noimar, that the reasoning of Reish Lakish, who holds that even regarding Puravu we say Gershon Eskar Kekatan Shenodam, that even if you're going to say that a ben noyach has reshus to be mekayim Puravu, when you're a ger and he gets schar as if you're mitzvah ma'isa, since now you have a chiyuv, that's a shinoi, and since it's a shinoi, therefore we say Gershon Eskar Kekatan Shenol Adami. But okay, fine. Now, based on that, the Chemda wants to argue on the Shev Shmaitza. Shev Shmaitza wanted to say that whatever children the Jewish people had before the Torah was given don't count according to Reish Lakish after the Torah was given, because the Jewish people converted. That's only if you go from a goy to a Jew, because you're going from discretionary mitzvah to obligatory mitzvah. But the Jews before the Torah was given had a chiyuv in Puravu. And after the Torah was given, they also have a chiyuv. So there's no change in the realm of Puravu from before the Torah was given to after. And therefore even Reish Lakish would agree that the kids the Jews had before the Torah was given count for them for after the Torah was given. Umeyata nira pashat zeh dafka begershon esgayer la'achar matan Torah. This l'chara it's pashat. This only applies to a ger that converts after the Torah was given, because you're going from discretionary to obligatory. Avol Yisrael b'matan Torah, kiven shekod matan Torah chayom mitzvahs v'ravu, v'imkein oz kimu ha'mitzvah ba'oisen abanim, nihid ata kishenes gairu ha'eva kukatan shenoilad, mikamakam le'inyan mitzvah zu, regarding this mitzvah v'ravu, moide reish lakish, reish lakish is moide, doloi have kukatan shenoilad. Why? Kiven doloi yishtani b'zeh, because they never changed. Even if you're going to say that a Jew by Matan Torah have a din of Geirim, but regarding Pru or Revu, nothing ever changed because they were always Chayev. Now, let us, based on this Kli Chemda, try to explain this Machlokes in our Gemara in Yevamos. Why does Reb Chananya ben Oisham Gamliel hold that a Goy is responsible for a failure to Mekayim, the mitzvah of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and they're liable even when they're a Jew? And I think it's pretty clear now that Rabbi Chananya ben Oisham Gamliel, would he say, well, I don't hold of Gershon as Gar Kekatan Shana? No, we can't say that, right? Because Tosfos says on Samach Beis that l'chayra everybody holds of Gershon as Gar Kekatan Shana Ladami. But I think the pshat is, regarding the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, did anything change in the life of this individual? In other words, we just learned the Chiddush from the Kli Chemda that Gershon is Gar Katan Shana Dami is not an all across the board svara. It's only if regarding this detail you have a change, so then we could say you're a new being regarding this detail. But when somebody becomes a Jew, are there major changes in the realm of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? Not really. You weren't allowed to kill before, you're not allowed to kill now. You weren't allowed to swear falsely before, you're not allowed to swear falsely now. You weren't allowed to murder before, you're not allowed to murder now. So there's no real change in the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Oisham Gamliel, he could say, why do Gerim have a hard life? Because they didn't keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. What do you mean, Gershon is Gayer? Yeah, but that Gershon is Gayer only applies regarding in Yonei Arayos, where these were not Arayos before as a guy, and now they are. So in that realm, there's a new change. But in the realm of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, there is no new change. And what would Rabbi Yossi hold? Rabbi Yossi says you're not responsible for failure to be Mekayim the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, because Gershon is Gayer. Maybe Rabbi Yossi says there is a big change in the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Namely, beforehand, if you didn't keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, you were Chayev Misa. And now you're not. Elamai, you'll say, but for some of them you are Chayev Misa. Yeah, but you didn't need witnesses, and you didn't need warning, right? For the Sheva, when a guy violates the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, it's much easier to hold them liable to a death penalty than for a Jew. So maybe Rabbi Yossi would say there is a categorical difference even in the realm of observance of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach from being a guy to being a Jew. That's perhaps an approach to explain the Machlokes Rabbi Chananya ben Oisham Gamliel and Rabbi Yossi.
Why did it say like a fact that they did not keep the Noahide? Why it seems to be like it's like for sure they didn't keep it. Maybe they did keep it. It seems to be like they're for sure they did not keep it.
Mm-hmm. Good question. Perhaps because the Rambam says that if a guy keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs, but he keeps it because he thinks it's just and right, he's still Chayev Misa. He's not considered observing the Sheva Mitzvahs. You have to keep it because God. One second. Right. In other words, you have to keep the Sheva Mitzvahs because Hashem gave Klal Yisrael the Sheva Mitzvahs on Har Sinai. So maybe, what's the likely, we could assume that a guy, but you're saying maybe not. Maybe you have real Noachides, you have, you do have Noachides that keep the Sheva Mitzvahs, so back in the day you had. Okay, it's a good point to think of, to think about.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.